Fellas, some of the biggest fights that we never got in the UFC unfortunately were cancelled, so I'm going to be predicting big, popular cancelled fights in the UFC that would have been fun to watch if they actually happened but just never fell through. Let me know if I missed any of these popular fights out, but we're going in there with the first one, arguably the most popular cancelled fight in UFC history because of the amount of times it's been cancelled and how fun the match would have been. Tony Ferguson versus Khabib. Yeah, this would have if this fight happened, this would have been such an interesting matchup because at the time, it wasn't like this was the wash Tony Ferguson, the one that was, you know, losing to guys like Paddy Pimblett. This was Ferguson in his prime on a massive win streak, ready to fight for the belt. And then we've got Khabib, obviously, in the prime of his career as well, mauling everyone. This would have been such an interesting matchup because you've got, obviously, the mauling, the grappling of Khabib, and then you've got Tony Ferguson. And I think in this fight, well, I've got two predictions. If we're talking about who I think is going to win, I think Khabib would have mauled him, and I think he would have finished him in the later rounds because it's a 5-rounder, or maybe it'd have gone to a decision because of, you know, Tony Ferguson used to have that dog in him. But I think Tony Ferguson would have been the first guy to make Khabib bleed. I can definitely see Khabib having Ferguson on his back, and then Ferguson just slashing him with elbows and eventually ends up cutting Khabib. So I think this would have been the first fight where Khabib gets cut. But overall, I do think Khabib would have won this fight. People say that Ferguson would have posed problems to Khabib, and he would. He's got great jiu-jitsu at the time. He was a very dangerous fighter. But I think Khabib would have just ran through him like he's ran through the rest of the lightweight division. I think he would have mauled him, beaten him with ground and pound, maybe finished him with ground and pound later on in the fight, or at least get a decision win. And I think Khabib would have not flawlessly, but I think he would have pulled off a comfortable win in this fight. So that's my first prediction. I do think Khabib would have been able to beat Tony Ferguson, even though I wish we saw this matchup because we saw the build-up. It was an interesting build-up, and I feel like the fight would have been a banger as well. But yeah, I'm picking Khabib to win this one. I don't think I've seen anything from Ferguson that makes me, well, that suggests that he can beat a guy like Khabib, one of the greatest lightweights, if not the greatest lightweight of all time. So I'm picking Khabib to win that one by decision or late finish by ground and pound. Next fight, Conor McGregor versus Rafael dos Anjos. Yeah, now this one, I think this one was UFC 196 when this was supposed to happen. Yeah, this would have been an interesting matchup because this one was when McGregor was kind of, I wouldn't say it was when he was in his come-up. This was when he obviously transitioned to lightweight, but this would have been an interesting fight. But I really do think McGregor would have chinned him in the first 2 rounds. I don't think it mattered if he was fighting Rafael dos Anjos or anyone else. I think Conor McGregor would have gone out there, chinned Rafael dos Anjos in the first 2 rounds and been able to stop him. I just don't think out of all the lightweights that there were at the time, Rafael dos Anjos would have been the guy to beat Conor McGregor. I just don't think he would have been. I think if this fight was to happen, McGregor would have calculated him, maybe read him in the first round. I will admit, Rafael dos Anjos does pose a lot of threats because of how well-rounded he is, but I think in the second round, I can definitely see Rafael dos Anjos going in and McGregor catching him, being able to stop him in the second round as well. So I'd have gone second round stoppage to Conor McGregor, but this would have been an interesting fight because if Rafael dos Anjos had beat Conor McGregor, this would have really, you know, messed up his lightweight career. This would have really changed his career in the lightweight division. Obviously, he went up to welterweight and fought Nate Diaz as well, but in the lightweight division at least, this would have been a really interesting fight to watch, but I'm picking McGregor to stop him in the first 2 rounds. I don't think out of all the lightweights, RDA would have been the guy to beat McGregor, so I'm going McGregor by stoppage. Next fight, Khamzat Chimaev versus Leon Edwards. This was supposed to be scheduled for early 2021. Yeah, this would have been such an interesting matchup because this is a fight that could have happened nowadays. In fact, for UFC 300, Dana White offered Leon Edwards to fight Khamzat Chimaev, but the fight couldn't be made because of, you know, Khamzat Chimaev had things going on. But this fight, it's still a fight that could happen to this day potentially. But back in the day, I'd have gone Khamzat Chimaev to win this fight. Now, if this would have been a fight night main event, that's where I'd probably favour Leon Edwards more because I feel like obviously we know that Khamzat Chimaev's stamina is terrible. It's no surprise that Chimaev's stamina is god-awful, and I feel like when he gets past the 3 rounds against a guy who's as calm as Leon Edwards, I think if he can, you know, stop getting finished, avoid getting finished by Khamzat Chimaev in the early rounds, I think that's where Leon Edwards is going to excel. He's going to piece him up in the 4th and the 5th round, but in the first few rounds, I feel like Khamzat Chimaev had ragdoll him because nowadays we know Leon Edwards for having this really well-rounded style, but back then, that wasn't the case. He was kind of just known for being a striker who had decent takedown defense, and I don't think that would have been enough to stop a guy like Khamzat Chimaev back then. Leon Edwards' grappling, we've only seen it improve massively in the past few fights, so in a 3-rounder, I'd have gone Khamzat Chimaev. In a 5-rounder, sorry, I'd have probably still gone Khamzat Chimaev, but the stamina would have been a real problem for Khamzat Chimaev. But I feel like it would have been a war if it was a 5-rounder. The first 2 rounds to Chimaev, the last few to Leon Edwards. But overall, if it's a 3-rounder, I'm going Khamzat Chimaev to beat Leon Edwards by. He could submit him. He's definitely got what it takes to submit him, but I trust Leon Edwards that he wouldn't get stopped. I'm going Khamzat Chimaev by decision. Next fight, we've got Zabit Magomedsharipov versus Yair Rodriguez. This would have been one of the most interesting matchups in the featherweight division. I kind of wish that we still had Zahabi in the UFC, man. That would have been so many fun matchups for him, and obviously ended up leaving the UFC, but this would have been such a fun matchup. You've got a guy as good and one of the most entertaining kickboxers in the UFC right now in Yair Rodriguez, and then you had Zahabi, who had the most damaging leg kicks. Overall, just a really good striker, well-rounded as well. And he was such an exciting prospect in the featherweight division. My pick would have been Yair Rodriguez, though. I feel like Zahabi, as good as he was, again, with similar to Chamay, his stamina was terrible. In fact, he made 3-rounders look like they were 5-rounders. I think Yair Rodriguez would have been able to beat him, not comfortably. I think it would have been a back-and-forth war on the feet, but I think Yair Rodriguez would have done enough to be able to beat Zahabi, especially in a 3-rounder. He wouldn't have been a 5-rounder back then, but in a 3-round fight, I think, Yair Rodriguez would have done enough to beat Zahabi, and he'd come off with a unanimous decision win. But man, if Zahabi improved his stamina and he came back in the featherweight division, or not came back, but if he continued fighting in the featherweight division, there'd have been so much fun matchups for this guy. So I wish we saw him, and I wish we saw this matchup fall through, but unfortunately we never did. Next matchup, Darren Till versus Marvin Vettori. This was actually scheduled in 2021. Yeah, this would have been interesting because at the time, I don't think Darren Till had fought Derek Brunson, and he hadn't obviously fought Dricus du Plessis either. So it wasn't like Darren Till being washed was the talk of the time. But I think Marvin Vettori would have won this fight comfortably. Whether it's a 3-rounder, it was a 5-rounder, as a fight night main event, I'd have gone Marvin Vettori to win this one. I do think Till would have had moments. I think it wouldn't have just been a one-way, complete, absolute bulldozing win by Marvin Vettori. There would have been times where Darren Till would have definitely caught Marvin Vettori, because Till's a great Thai boxer, great kickboxer. He wouldn't have finished Marvin Vettori, though. We know him for having an iron chin. But I just think Marvin Vettori's too well-rounded. He'd have been able to mix up the striking with the grappling, which would have posed so many threats to Darren Till, as we saw against Robert Whittaker. And on the feet, he's a really good boxer, is Marvin Vettori as well. I do think Till would have been able to land on him a few times, not wobble him or anything, but he'd been able to land on him. But I just don't think Till would have done enough, and Marvin Vettori would have gone away with a decision win at the end of the 5 rounds. Plus, we've seen nowadays that Vettori is like a top 5 fighter in the middleweight division. In no circumstance nowadays is Till ever going to be a top 5 fighter, so I'm going to go Marvin Vettori to win this fight by decision. Not stop him like Derek Brunson did, but I do think he'll be able to pull off a decision win in this fight. And then the next fight, Jorge Masvidal versus Leon Edwards. Again, another Leon Edwards fight on this list. This was supposed to be for late 2021, same year that the Khamzat Chimaev fight was scheduled. Now, this would have been interesting because I feel like all the welterweights that Masvidal fought, most of them were grapplers, obviously. Kamaru Usman, Colby Covington, Gilbert Burns. Whereas Leon Edwards, like I said at the time, he hadn't shown that he's got great grappling, so it would have been a stand-up fight. I think if someone would have gone to decision, it would have been Leon Edwards. He would have outpointed Darren Till, and I think if I had to lean towards someone in this fight, I'm picking Leon Edwards. I think he's got elite striking, and I think he'd be able to just pick apart Masvidal. But if anyone was to get a finish, I can definitely see Masvidal getting the finish. Leon Edwards has been caught in multiple fights. We've seen him get caught by Nate Diaz. He's been caught a few times by Kamaru Usman. Nothing significant by Usman, but he's been caught and wobbled in a few fights, and he also doesn't like pressure. And I could see Masvidal definitely posing a lot of threats in that fight because of how scary his knockout power is and how good he is at setting up shots. So I think if anyone was to get a finish, it's going to be Masvidal. But if someone's going to get a decision win and the more likely outcome, I'm going Leon Edwards by decision. But again, this would have been such an interesting matchup because of the rivalry that they had. These guys hated each other at the time, and if this fight fell through, it would have been one of the funnest matchups to watch. But yeah, that is me predicting cancelled matchups in the UFC. Let me know your thoughts on all of these matchups and your predictions on all of them, and if I missed out any cancelled fights in the UFC. But yeah, I wish we saw some of these fights, and thank you for watching.